Cause of laughter. Chapter 18. Frightened into madness, falling from a building and hurting the past. Zhang avoided the banquet due to the suspect's hallucination, but it was said that General Liu asked Feng Shi to sing a song. Feng Shi sang a song, then asked her to sing another, and finally he had to sing a song that Feng Shi didn't want to sing. As soon as Feng Shi felt uncomfortable, she fainted and fell to the ground. When Shugu saw it, she quickly stepped forward and helped her up. She saw that her face was gray, her hands were cold, she was limp, and she could not stand at all. Shugu took her with both hands, hugged her sideways, and gently placed her on a couch. General Liu had already put out his pipe and stood on the floor. Seeing Shugu's effortless look, he smiled and said, "You look like this, but you have such strength." As he said that, he stretched out his hand and shook it. He held Shugu's right arm, and said with a smile, "The flesh is quite strong. It's really unambiguous." Shugu retracted her hand and said solemnly, "There is someone here who is about to die, and you still have the heart to make a joke, Liu." The general smiled and said, "She is just dizzy. She will be fine after lying down for a while." After saying that, he touched Feng Shi's hand, said ah and said, "This child is really sick. Please find a doctor quickly." Then he rang the bell and called the waiter in, and ordered him to call the doctor. He stroked Feng Shi's body for a while, and said to himself, "Liu Dezhu, your hand was too cruel. How could you beat her so hard that she was covered with injuries? It's no wonder that she still wants to sing a song like this. She can't stand it anymore." As he said this, he picked up Feng Shi's arm and kept smelling it. By this time, the room was packed with people, all here to serve the wife. A Western doctor also came in, and after taking a look at Feng Shi, he understood half of it. After examining the symptoms of the disease for a while, he said, "This is not a serious illness. It's just a little irritation. Just rest for 2 days. These people in the room are not suitable." As he said that, he looked around the room. "Take a look." General Liu waved his hand to everyone and said, "Who wants you here? You all know how to treat diseases. I save money and don't need to find a doctor. Let's go." As he said, he just pushed with his hands and used his feet. Just kick and knock out all the male and female servants in the house. Shugu was restrained by General Liu, but she couldn't escape, so she took advantage of this opportunity to hide out of the room. Because they were being bombarded, she hid together. "I was thinking of sneaking home tonight, but seeing Feng Shi's condition, I'm afraid it's a matter of life and death. If I leave, I won't be able to come back again. Where can I get all the news from now on?" So he quietly went upstairs and called Jiashu, saying that something very important had happened here, and he had to stay here for 1 more night, and asked him to send a message to his father. After Shugu finished speaking, she hung up the phone without waiting for Jiashu to ask again. That night, it turned out that Feng Shi was seriously ill, so everyone moved her to the dormitory upstairs. She was unconscious for the first half of the night. General Liu listened to the doctor and asked her to rest, but he invited a few friends to a hotel room to have fun. After 2 o'clock, all the maids went to bed, leaving only Shugu and an old Yang Ma sitting in the room together, serving Feng Shi's tea. Shugu had nothing to do, but she was killing time by talking to Yang's mother. Speaking of Feng Shi's injury, Yang's mother stretched out her head and said softly, "Oh, does this count as powerful? It's really amazing. You haven't seen it before. In the past, we had a wife and a concubine. Here, no need. Mention, the wife is an elderly person. She can't stand being angry all day long, so she went back to her hometown. Not long after, she passed away. As soon as the wife died, the aunt was shaken, and she went out to listen in the car all day long, playing in the park. It is said that she met her boyfriend outside. One night, my concubine came back after listening to a night show. Our general didn't go out that day, so he was waiting with a big cigarette. Then he smoked again, smoked, and sat up again. When it was past 12 o'clock, he drank a glass of brandy, and was alone in the room, dancing and cursing. After a while, his concubine came back. As soon as she got upstairs, the general stepped forward and kicked her to the ground. He grabbed her hair with his left hand, took out a pistol from his pocket with his right hand, pointed it at her face, and asked, "Where did she come from?" The aunt was frightened, begged for mercy, and cried, "It's nothing more than eating in a restaurant with my cousin. It's fake to listen to the show. How dare we go in while we are standing far away, in front?" I only heard the pistol snap twice. The general grabbed the person, past the railing, and threw him downstairs. Yang Ma never finished her words. She only heard an ah sound from the bed. Looking back, Feng Shi turned over on the bed and rolled onto the floor. Shu Gu and Yang Ma were both startled, and quickly stepped forward and helped her to the bed. It turned out that she had never fallen asleep, so she stretched out her hand to hold Shu Gu's lapel, crying, "I'm scared to death, you have to save me." Yang's mother was also frightened, standing aside and watching blankly. She was silent, but Shu Gu patted Feng Shi with her hand, and said, "Don't be afraid. Mother Yang just thought you were asleep and told me it was a joke. How could such a thing happen?" Feng Shi said, "You can't fake it. I'm not afraid anymore." "So what if I'm afraid?" He sighed again. When Shu Gu was about to comfort her a few more words, she heard a commotion downstairs. Probably General Liu was back. Yang's mother trembled and said to Feng Shi, "My wife, please don't say what you just said. If you say it, I am a bit unreliable." Feng Shi said, "Don't worry, I will never do it." Said. Just then, I suddenly heard General Liu shouting outside the window. "How are you now? Is it better than before?" Feng Shi turned over on the bed and faced inside. Shu Gu and Yang Ma also turned around quickly to welcome them. "Go to the door of the room." General Liu entered the room and asked Shu Gu with a smile, "How is she?" Shu Gu said, "She is asleep and not awake. Let's go away and don't disturb her." Shu Gu's luggage and belongings were not brought with her. General Liu was very considerate and had already given her a small iron bed and a pair of quilts. Moreover, she did not want to live with those old ladies, but lived in a very clean West Wing room by the corridor downstairs. Shu Gu came downstairs, and Yang Ma seemed to have forgotten her fear, and smiled at Shu Gu under the electric light. When she smiled, she looked at the room where Shu Gu lived. Shu Gu also understood what she meant. She snorted and sneered. She quietly entered the room, closed the door tightly, turned off the light, and slept with her clothes on. When I woke up, the sun had already shown most of the white light from under the eaves. I could only hear General Liu's voice, cursing on the eaves. "What the hell are you causing? I couldn't sleep all night because of the trouble. The family can't bear it, so send her to the hospital." After hearing this, Shu Gu realized that Feng Shi's illness was not cured. She hurriedly opened the door and went upstairs. She saw Feng Shi's hair, as messy as a ball of weeds, covering her whole face. She only wore a pair of clothes. There is a pink small coat with a double front, but 2 buttons are wrongly buttoned, so the coat is worn diagonally on the body. She said nothing, sitting on a hard wooden chair with her chest straightened, her eyes looking at people through her messy hair. A pair of shorts exposed her white legs and feet below the knees, but they were swaying like a swing. When she saw Shu Gu coming in, she smiled at Shu Gu with her white teeth exposed. That look was really scary. Shu Gu stood at the door and paused for a moment, then entered the room and asked her, "Madam, what's wrong with you? If you scare me with a pistol and don't let me speak, I won't speak. I didn't commit such a serious crime and should be shot. Do you think so? I didn't go to the theater with anyone, and I didn't have a cousin. They couldn't shoot me and throw me downstairs. I still have 50,000 yuans in the bank, and my jewelry is worth several thousand. Being young, I can't bear to die. Sister, are you right to say what I said?" Shu Gu held her hand with one hand and covered her mouth with the other, waving her hand again and again. At this time, 2 Mabian came in and said to Feng Shi, "Madam, you are not feeling well, please." Before they finished speaking, Feng Shi burst into tears, jumped up on her bare feet, and hugged Shu Gu's hand with both hands. He crawled on Shu Gu's body and shouted, "It's amazing, it's amazing. They're going to drag me to be shot." Ma Bian smiled and said, "Madam, don't worry too much. We are accompanying you to the hospital." Feng, he jumped up and down, and said, I won't go, you are lying to me." Seeing this, the 2 Ma Bian stared blankly, helpless at all. General Liu was waiting for her to go out on the corridor. Seeing that she refused to leave, he jumped in and said, "You 2 losers. If she says she won't leave, why don't you just let her stay? You won't let her go. Did she drag him away?" Ma Bian was afraid of the general, after all. The general was angry, so he stepped forward boldly, dragged Feng Shi by one arm and left. Feng Shi refused to go anywhere, crying, shouting, kicking and falling. After making a fuss for a while, she lay down on the ground and rolled around. Shugu couldn't bear it when she saw it, and was about to tell General Liu not to send her to the hospital for the time being, but 2 more Mabian came in, totaling 4 people, and forced Feng Shi downstairs. Feng Shi stretched out a hand in the crowd, waved backwards and shouted, "Sister, help me." They carried her out of the inner courtyard and still heard the shouting. Shugu had hated Feng Shi very much since her change of heart. Now that she saw how evil she was, she felt that it was pitiful for a young person to suffer from other people's tempers and oppression, so she lay down on the floor. A few tears were shed on the side railing. When General Liu saw her behind him, he smiled and said, "What's wrong with you? Women's hearts are always soft. Look, I didn't even cry, but you did." Shugu took advantage of this opportunity, wiped away her tears, and said Shang. General Liu smiled slightly and said, "No, I just shed tears easily. Which hospital is my wife in? Let me go and see later. Okay?" General Liu smiled and said, "Okay. This is your good intention, why not? If you always take care of me and don't get jealous, then it will be easy to handle. I didn't know which hospital was better, so I asked them to send her to the emergency hospital. That hospital is very expensive and probably won't be damaged. I'll let the car take you there later. This morning, would you like to have dinner with me?" Shugu said, "How can that be done? Isn't it a joke for a servant to sit with the general?" General Liu laughed and said, "What's the joke? I will lift you up as much as I like, even my wife, whose background is not as good as yours." Shugu said, "It's not very convenient. After all, let's talk about it in the future." She was so proud that she felt ashamed. She patted the railing and laughed. When it was time to eat at noon, General Liu ate alone, but there was a table full of food. He kicked the waiter's mother out of the dining room, leaving Shugu alone to serve the meal. The male and female servants couldn't help but worry about her, but she took it calmly. General Liu's rice was filled and placed on the table. Then he took 2 steps back and said calmly, "General, I understand your kindness towards me. Is there anyone who wouldn't want to be the general's wife? But I have something to say first. If you can rely on me, I will be willing to build 3 or 4 bedrooms. Otherwise, I won't dare to do any work here." General Liu held the chopstick bowl in his hand and just stared. Looking at Shugu, she laughed and said, "This kid is just right. He is just right with me." Shugu stood still, folded her arms in front of her chest, and said to General Liu obliquely, "Although I am a contemporary, but I am still a girl, and playing with you in a daze is ruining my life. Even if you don't think I am a shabby person, you still want to hold weddings properly when you come to my house. I have parents. Secondly, you have a wife and these people, so I am totally willing to do it. But I don't know if you really like me or if you really like me. If you like me, you will understand my painstaking efforts." As he spoke, he lowered his hands, lowered his head, and his voice became softer, showing a very embarrassed look. General Liu put down his bowl and chopsticks, touched his face with his hands, and said with a hesitant smile, "What you said is right, but don't use your words to anger me." Shugu said, "This is wrong. I am a child from a poor family. If you don't follow someone like you, who else are you going to follow? Do you think I'm an annoying child?" General Liu said with a smile, "That's it. But it's better to go faster." He said, "As long as it's not today, you can do it tomorrow. But don't play around with me first, lest others see it and say I'm not serious." General Liu said with a smile, "You're right. Don't worry. Tomorrow will be a good day, just the day after tomorrow. Aren't you going to the hospital today? Just go home and tell your parents. I guess they have to agree. This is my lifelong matter. How can they manage it? Besides, they never dreamed of it, so there is no reason not to agree." General Liu was so upset by this statement that he said, "Don't talk to me. Those people are eating together. I will leave after I finish eating. You can eat at this table." Shugu chuckled and nodded in agreement. General Liu thought to himself, no matter which woman, there is no one who does not like compliments. Look at this girl. I only give her this little face, and she is happy. He thought about being happy and smiled. Just because of Feng Shi, I was delayed all morning without doing anything, so I got in the car and went out. Shugu knew that he had gone far away, so she called a few old maids to come to the table together, and everyone had a hearty meal. Shugu was full, and said that it was the general's order, so she took the family's public utility car to the emergency hospital to see Feng Shi. Feng Shi was staying in the first-class ward, living alone in a very exquisite and clean room. She was lying on an iron bed, with the white bedding surrounding her body. Only her messy hair was exposed, and she was deeply sunken into the soft pillow. As soon as Shugu entered the room, she heard her mumbling something about shooting people with a pistol and throwing me downstairs. She kept talking. Sometimes she could hear what she said clearly, and sometimes there was sound but no words. But she kept calling Uncle Fan. There was a low sofa in front of the bed, and her mother, Aunt Shen, was sitting there with her face covered and crying. When she looked up and saw Shugu, she stood up and nodded, and said, "Sister Guan, look, what should I do?" After saying this, 2 lines of tears, like throwing sand, poured out. When Shugu looked at Feng Shi lying on the bed, her cheeks were very red, her eyes were tightly closed, and she kept mumbling, "Throw her downstairs, throw her downstairs." Shugu said, "She is confused now. What will the doctor say?" Aunt Shen said, "When I first came, I was really scared. She can yell and cry, but now she must be tired, and has been lying like this for 2 hours. I think she is no longer viable." As she said that, she leaned on the back of the sofa and cried with her shoulders raised. Shugu was about to persuade her, but she saw Feng Shi twisting her body on the bed and giggling. She laughed louder and louder, and said, with her eyes closed, "You are wronging me, more than 1 million private property. You want me to take care of it all? As long as you don't beat me again. Look, I have so many injuries." After saying that, she started crying again. Aunt Shen stretched out her hands and shook them a few times, saying, "She laughs for a while, and cries for a while like this. What do you think?" But she replied on the bed, "Don't let others know about this. If it gets to Uncle Fan's ears, you will be so ashamed." Then she opened her eyes. Seeing Shugu, she stretched out a hand from the quilt, shook it, and said with a smile, "Aren't you Sister Guan? Say hello to Uncle Fan when you see him. You said I'm sorry to him. I'm dying. Please forgive me for being young and ignorant." Then she burst into tears. Shugu hurried forward and held her hand, and she used the back of Shugu's hand to wipe her tears. Shugu used her other hand to pat her back through the quilt and said, "Uncle Fan will definitely forgive you. Maybe he will come to see you." Here Feng Shi was crying, which alarmed the female nurse in the hospital. She hurried in and said, "You girl, please go out quickly. The patient will be stimulated by seeing guests." Shugu knew the rules of the hospital and should not disobey the nurse, so she walked out of the ward. At this, she felt something in her heart, and felt that the fate of life was really certain. Feng Shi and Jiashu had broken up to this extent, but they were still connected to each other. Seeing Feng Shi sleeping in the bed, she kept thinking about Uncle Fan. Uncle Fan would never know. I will send him a message. So she called Jiashu in the hospital and asked him to go to Central Park to talk to him. Jiashu answered the phone, overjoyed, and promised to come immediately. At that moment, Shugu ordered a car to go back to Liu's house and hired a rickshaw to go to the park. Arriving at the park gate, she suddenly remembered something. "I remembered that when I was taking care of my father in the hospital, I had a dream in which I dreamed of Jiashu and I walking in the park together. Unexpectedly, I had the opportunity to walk with him today. This is how things are in the world. Real things seem like dreams. Dreams can also come true one day. Am I not an example of this? It's just that the phone call was too hasty. I only said to meet in the park, but forgot to say where in the park to meet. The park is so big. Where can I find him?" Thinking about it, as soon as I walked onto the corridor inside the gate, this mystery was revealed. It turned out that Joshua was sitting on the low railing at the entrance of the corridor. He had been waiting here for a long time. As soon as he saw Shugu, he came forward and said with a smile, "I received the call, and immediately hired a car and rushed here. According to my guess, you must not have arrived yet, so I am sitting here waiting. Otherwise, the park is so big, you look for me, and I look for you. How can we meet? The eldest lady has really suffered for me. I feel very sorry. I have to treat you to express my gratitude." Shugu said, "To be honest, we are like this. We like to meddle in other people's business. As long as things are done quickly, thank you, or not, it doesn't matter." The two talked and walked east along the corridor, passing the Lai Jin Yuzuan where rich people gathered, and then past the outer wall of the Forbidden City, where few people walked. Shugu walked alone with a young man, which was the first time in her life. In front of many people, you have to lower your head. In places where there are not many people, you have to lower your head even more. I have never been afraid of seeing people, but I don't understand why. Today I just feel uneasy. They walked to the back of the park, under the cypress trees. Jiashu said, "Let's find a place to sit here and look at the lotus flowers." Shugu agreed. On the western corner of Berlin, there is a row of tea houses. Outside the tea houses is the wide moat of the imperial city. On the other side of the moat, there is a row of sparse palace willows, which shade a row of city walls. Especially at the corner of the western city wall, there are 4 or 5 tall willows under the city, clustered around a corner of the arrow tower, which is really like a picture. But Jiashu only asked Shugu to look at the lotus flowers, but not the arrow tower. Shugu found a tea house, sat on a chair, and looked at the lotus leaves in the moat. Half of them were burnt yellow, leaning to the left and right, lying on the water surface, with some lotus pods sticking out of the lotus leaves. "Where is the lotus flower?" Jiashu also sat down, right opposite her. The waiter at the tea house brought over the teapot and melon seeds. Jiashu poured tea and offered melon seeds. He didn't know what Shugu wanted to discuss, and he didn't dare to ask, so he smiled. Shugu looked around and smiled. "This place has a beautiful view." Jiashu said, "The view is very beautiful." Shugu said, "We were in Shichihai a few days ago, and the lotus leaves were still green. In just a few days, the lotus leaves have withered." At this point, Shugu was suddenly shocked. This was a perfunctory remark. I don't want her to suspect that I was referring to something, so I said seriously, "Mr. Fan, I'm talking to you on the phone today not because I have something to discuss with you, but because of the girl from the Shen family. She is also very pitiful." Jiashu laughed and said, "Miss, why are you still talking about her? What does it have to do with me whether she is pitiful or not?" The aunt said, "What she did before was wrong." But Jiashu shook his hand several times and said, "Since the eldest lady knows that she is wrong, that's enough. Since we broke up at the Jonington that day, I decided not to mention her again. People have different aspirations, so why force it? The eldest lady is a very straightforward person, so I don't want to say much. Simply, I don't want to mention her again in this life." Hearing that he was so determined, Shugu didn't want to tell Fengxi about it. But whether he wanted to mention Fengxi or not was one thing, whether Fengxi was suffering now, whether Jiashu wanted to know about it, was another thing. So she smiled and said, "If she died now, how would Mr. Fan feel?" Jiashu sneered, "That's what she did. How can I feel? The eldest lady, don't mention her. I feel very sad when I mention her." Shugu said, "In this case, I won't mention her for the time being, and I'll talk about it in the future. I agree with these 4 words. No matter what it is, at the moment, you can never think that it is perfect." The ancients said, "Strong grass is revealed in strong winds, loyal ministers are revealed in times of crisis." Therefore, good people can only be seen in times of crisis, but it is too late to know at that time. Moreover, a truly good person will never wish others disasters and misfortunes in order to reveal his true colors. For example, your father believes in the knights of the past and present. But what knights do is to eliminate violence and protect the good, to help the weak and to suppress the strong. If there were no violent people doing unfair things, there would be no need for knights. Does it mean that knights want to show off their skills and hope that unfair things will happen? So now, I have learned a lesson and gained some knowledge. Now I know that I didn't know good people before." Shugu heard his accent and knew that every word was referring to her. She thought that she had given her heart to Jiashu since she knew him. No matter how attentive or indifferent he was always indifferent, so she simply stepped out of the circle and used the third party's status to smooth things over for them. Unexpectedly, she had already stepped out of the circle, but suddenly there was such a sincere expression that she had never had before. This was really beyond her expectations. She smiled and said, "Mr. Fan said very clearly, even someone like me, who has no knowledge at all, can understand." Jiashu smiled and just ate melon seeds. He poured himself a cup of tea and asked, "Uncle used to trust me a lot, but now he probably knows that I am a bit naughty." Shugu said, "No, he will say anything to my face." Jiashu said, "Of course, he is very straightforward. But there is one thing that puzzles me. 2 months ago, it seemed as if he had something to tell me, but it was difficult to say it, and I was inconvenient to ask, so I wondered what it was." Shugu was looking at the lotus leaves in the moat at this time, and saw a big red dragonfly flying beside the small lotus leaves, but it kept its tail on the water, and after a long time, it did not fly away. She was also fascinated. So whether Shugu heard Jiashu's words clearly, or whether the more clearly she heard, the less she was willing to answer, Jiashu could not guess. He answered casually, and there was no reason to repeat it, so he was silent. Shugu looked at the city wall and smiled. There is also a city wall at the entrance of my alley. It is very annoying to be blocked by it when I come out. There is also a city wall here. It is a very good scenery when you look at it. Jiashu said, yes, I also think the city wall here is interesting. The two talked about the scenery. Just when they were talking with great interest, a waiter in the woods suddenly shouted, is there Mr. Fan? Jiashu nodded and asked, where to find him? A waiter came up and handed a business card to Shugu saying, is your surname Fan? I am a waiter at Lai Jin Yuzuan. There is a Miss He, who wants to come over to talk. Shugu took a look at the business card and saw the 3 words Helena. She hesitated and said, I don't know this person. Is she a friend of Mr. Fan? Jiashu said, yes, you must meet this person. I will introduce you later. Then she said to the waiter, tell Miss He and we will come. The waiter agreed and left. Jiashu said, Miss, let's go to Lai Jin Yuzuan to sit down. Miss, he is my cousin's friend. She is very friendly. Shugu smiled and said, I am like this. If I sit with a lady, not only will I be embarrassed, but she will also be embarrassed. Jiashu said with a smile, young lady is a very straightforward person. How can she still be bound by such cliches? Shugu was afraid that people would say she was not generous, so she nodded and said, it's good to meet her, but I can't sit for long and have to leave. Jiashu said, it's up to you. As long as I introduce you to her, that's all. So Jiashu paid the tea bill and went to Leijin Yexuan with Shugu. Jiashu led Shugu to the balcony railing, where a fashionable lady stood up and nodded. Shugu was shocked when she saw her. Fengxi was clearly ill in the hospital. Why did she come here? She stood far away and was just stunned. Jiashu understood and rushed forward to introduce them, saying that this was Miss He and this was Miss Guan. Helena saw that Shugu was only wearing a large blue cloth gown, and her hair was not cut, with a pair of thin braids and a full moon bun. She was a very healthy and simple, old-fashioned woman. She reached out and shook Shugu's hand, smiling. Please sit down, please sit down. I heard Mr. Fan say that Miss Guan was a generous person. Nice to meet you today. Shugu waited for her to speak, which proved that she was indeed not Fengxi. Jiashu had never mentioned that he knew a Miss He. So why did he mention me in front of Miss He? Perhaps their friendship was not ordinary. Since she was so affectionate when they met, she had to be polite, so she smiled and said, Miss, he went to invite Mr. Fan just now, and I was embarrassed to come to you. Mr. Fan insisted on introducing me, so I had to come. Helena smiled and said, don't be so polite. When making friends, as long as you have similar personalities, there should be no difference in appearance. So she moved a chair and let Shugu sit down. Jiashu also sat down opposite Helena. Shugu took a closer look at Helena and saw that her face and Fengxi's face were basically the same, except that Helena's face was a little fuller, and she was more reserved in her actions and words, unlike Fengxi who was so willful. If these 2 people were walking together, anyone would say that they were a pair of sisters. Since she was so good-looking, not to mention her status, her knowledge was naturally good. Except for age, I'm afraid Fengxi couldn't compare with her. Therefore, Jiashu had no regrets about losing Fengxi, and he had this Miss He to fill the gap, so it was no wonder that he was indifferent to Fengxi's matter. Thinking about things in his mind, he didn't have the heart to pay attention to Miss He's cheerful hospitality, but just smiled and casually agreed to her words. Helena said, I've been sitting here for a long time. I saw Miss Guan and Mr. Fan walking over, so I guessed half of it right. Jiashu said, oh, you saw us walking over. We were drinking tea over there. Did you guess it right too? Helena said, that's not the case. I was just walking around the garden, and I saw you outside the woods. Jiashu listened in silence. Helena said, it's rare to meet Miss Guan. I want to invite Miss Guan to have a drink. Would you like to come? Shugu said, I really have something to do today. I can't bother you. Please make another appointment, Miss He. I will come. Helena laughed and said, could it be that Miss Guan thinks we are a bit rich? If she had something to do, why did she have time to come to the park today? Jiashu said, she really has something to do. If I hadn't told her to introduce her to Miss He, she would have left long ago. Helena smiled at the two of them and said, in that case, I don't have to go to the park to find a restaurant. The Western food here is not bad. Let's eat something here, okay? Shugu felt uneasy at this time. How could she have the heart to eat? She moved her chair, stood up, and said with a smile, I'm sorry, I have something to do, and I have to go. Helena and Jiashu both stood up and said, even if you don't want to eat, it doesn't matter if you sit for a while. Shugu smiled and said, it's not that I don't want to. To be honest, I came to the park today because I have something important to discuss with Mr. Fan. Although we didn't come to a conclusion, I should go and reply to the letter. She said this and left the tea house. Seeing that she was unwilling to stay, Helena did not force her to stay. She held her hand and walked her to the sidewalk, smiling, and said, I'm sorry today. I will definitely invite you again another day. Mr. Fan and I meet almost every day. If you have any words, please let Mr. Fan pass them on. After saying this, he shook Shugu's hand a few times, then said goodbye and went back to his seat. Shugu lowered her head and walked along the way, thinking, we passed by Lai Jinyuzuan first, and she noticed it. We went to the cypress forest to drink tea, and she was scouting outside the forest. In this way, she is very suspicious of me. In fact, I came here today for Feng Shi. What does it have to do with me? She said that she met Mr. Fan every day, which was true. Not only that, Mr. Fan went to Lai Jinyuzuan and there were so many tea houses, and he didn't need to look for her, but he always found her. They must meet here often. Shen Fengxi is a native of the mountains, and she has a lover again. Why are you still in love with her? As for me, there is no need to worry about others. Thinking in my heart, I don't know. I wondered where I was going. I saw a chair by the road and sat down. I sat there quietly, and suddenly thought, Joshu's words, strong grasses known by strong winds must have a reason. Could I have been wrong? I leaned on the chair and thought quietly. From a distance, I saw people coming and going in the corridor. Half of them were men and women in pairs. Then I thought of the dream I had in the hospital before, and the question that Joshu said his father wanted to ask but didn't. From all these, I felt that my previous view of Miss He was not right, so I felt a little relieved. I felt relieved and raised my head. Suddenly, I saw Joshu and Helena walking side by side from the corridor. At the same time, there were two men beside him. One pointed and said, isn't that Joshu? Who is the woman? The other said, I know. That's his fiancée, Miss Shen. He even introduced her to me formally. Shugu didn't hear the word Shen clearly, but she suddenly understood. She smiled and left the garden. This time, she did something earth-shattering. To know how earth-shattering it was, we will explain it next time. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.